Hello again, everybody. This is Steve Callis with our continuing efforts to interview all of the Power Memorial Academy Hall of Famers. Today we have a real special guest, Jap Trimble, 1970 grad, and he's especially special even in the Hall of Fame because he's a multiple Hall of Famer. And by that I mean he was inducted a number of years ago as a member of the 1970 basketball teams, one of the greatest high school basketball teams of all time. But he also was elected last year in 2020 individually, which is probably something that's long overdue. But we have him here today. We're going to interview him. We're going to talk about everything from childhood to Power to Maryland, where he played college ball, to his post-college career and life. And it's a pleasure to welcome Jap Trimble to the Hall of Fame interviews. Jap, I just wanted to ask you from the very beginning, we'd like to start with, where did you grow up and how did you wind up at Power Memorial Academy?
Well, first of all, Steve, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to take part in this interview. It's always positive to discuss, my background history and my years at Power. So I appreciate this opportunity. Basically, I grew up in the East Harlem, Spanish Harlem section of Manhattan, and I attended parochial school, Our Lady Queen of Angels. And the school is pretty significant because that's the same high school that the Pope visited when he came to New York in 2014. He selected one elementary school to visit, and of all the schools, he visited Our Lady Queen of Angels. I had gone to that school from first grade through sixth grade. I played on the sixth grade team. After the sixth grade, I basically coerced my mother to allow me to switch schools and go to a public school because I had the opportunity of combining seventh and eighth grade in the same year. So I really fought my mother hard. She didn't want me to go. I fought her really hard on that. She allowed me to go. I actually went to the school for 3 weeks, could not stand it. I wasn't learning anything. And so I asked my mother if I could go back to Our Lady Queen of Angels. And reluctantly, she allowed me to return back to my elementary school. So I was able to finish seventh and eighth grade there and played on the basketball team from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And added to that, Ed Searcy, who accompanied me to Power, and we were teammates in elementary school from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. My eighth grade team, CYO team, played for the New York City championship. And we played against St. Anthony's, which Steve Donahue played on that St. Anthony's team. So and later Steve also was my teammate at Power. But in that game, we actually lost in triple overtime. And it was a very unfortunate loss for us. I think we should have won that game, but nevertheless, in triple overtime, we lost that game. Unbeknownst to me, at that game was the Power Memorial coach, Jack Donahue. And Ed and I, after the eighth grade, we had both registered to attend Cardinal Hayes. And so that was the high school that I assumed that I would be going to until one afternoon in the early summer of 1966, my grade school coach received a phone call from Jack Cunard saying that he wanted to meet with the entire first starting team of my grade school and wanted to offer all of us scholarships to attend Power Memorial.
Wow.
And with that, yeah, I knew of Power. I knew of Lou Alcindor, who happened to have been a friend of my older brother. And so I knew the success of Power, and I knew the tradition and just the name of Power Memorial. So to have the opportunity to go to Power was a no-brainer. And myself, Ed Searcy, and one other of my grade school teammates, Lenny Rowe, the three of us all decided to go to Power. And that's how we got into Power in the fall of 1966.
Wow.
Now,
No, keep going.
my freshman year at Power, Ed, Searcy, and I, we played on the JV team. Lenny Rowe played on the freshman team. My freshman year, I was getting probably average playing time and possibly average maybe 6-7 points my freshman year. And there were some games that I didn't play, and I wasn't used to that, and was getting a little disheartened in that scenario. But after my freshman year, I probably worked the hardest that I've ever worked as an athlete to really put myself into a better scenario from a basketball playing standpoint. And plus, I grew a few inches between my freshman and sophomore year. So I came back my sophomore year, and I was becoming somewhat dominant in certain cases on the basketball court.
And Jap, if I could interject just before you start on your varsity career, I just want to give you a quote from Brendan Malone, who you've cited to me as one of your influences, or, you know, people you really respected from Power and helped you along the way. But I had the chance to speak with him a week ago, and I said, "Can you give me a quote on Jap Trimble?" And this is, of course, all these years later, but, you know, Malone doesn't forget anything. I will say that about him. And here's the quote. And he said, "Jap Trimble, he was a solid person. He was a terrific player, and he was a very smart player. And if you want to understand how great Jap Trimble was, all you have to know is that one day at Power, I was in the gym, and Lefty Driesell, the coach of Maryland, who, if you don't know who he was, obviously you do and I do, he was a wildly successful coach at the University of Maryland, and you would wind up going there with Lenny Elmore. And Brendan Malone said, quote, if you want to know how great a player Jap Trimble was, all you have to know is Lefty Driesell walked into the Power Memorial Gym to look at and meet with Jap Trimble and Lenny Elmore. So Coach Malone was very complimentary of you, not surprisingly, but I thought you might just want to hear that before you start telling us about the rest of your varsity career at Power.
Well, again, I appreciate everything Brendan had to offer there. I really admired him. He was the physical education teacher and the baseball coach. And we really related more during the gym classes because he never coached me per se, but I had the ultimate respect for him then and continue to do to this very day. When I came back my sophomore year, the very first game of the season, I wasn't a starter, but as circumstances goes, the individual that was supposed to start showed up a little late. We were already in the dressing room and he hadn't shown up yet. So Jack Cunard came over to me and said that he was going to insert me into the starting lineup. And we were playing against LaSalle. And unfortunately, we lost that game, my first varsity game. But I scored 20 points in my first varsity game, which really surprised me. But it showed me that, and it gave me the confidence that I could succeed, you know, in high school basketball and playing at Power Memorial. We had a somewhat decent sophomore season. I think we were like 13-6. And our sophomore year, we also introduced Lenny Elmore into Power Memorial. Lenny had not attended Power as a freshman. during the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, Jack Cunard indicated that we were going to be getting this 6'8", 6'9" fellow by the name of Elmore. And so the first day of school, I remember walking up to the corner of 61st and Amsterdam, and he was this long kid standing by himself. And so I immediately went up to him and asked, "Are you Elmore?" And he said yes. And that's how our relationship started. And Power was a lucky find to have Lenny come to Maryland and start his high school and begin his career, his very worthwhile career in many respects. But yeah, sophomore year, we were 13-6. And after my sophomore year, apparently I had worked so hard on my knees that I developed some issues with my knees. So I literally had surgery immediately following my sophomore year, removed a piece of my cartilage, which was somewhat damaged. And worked hard during that summer and came back for our junior year. And we had a much better junior year. I think we were 18-3. And unfortunately, fortunately, we played for the city championship, but unfortunately, we lost against Malloy in a game that I still contend we should have won. And that's been the one defeat through my grade school, high school, and even college career that I look down at the most as being the most disappointing loss that I've ever had. And the next year we came back as seniors and had a perfect season, 22-0, went back to the city championship, played against Malloy once again. And this time we handled them with a little effort. And we were very happy to give that victory to our coach, Jack Cunard, because that was going to be his last coaching game at Power. And such tribute should be given to Jack Cunard. He was the person who really helped to shape and influence my young adulthood. And he continues to be someone that I think about. He's deceased. He died in 1997. Such a loss. He was one of the great high school coaches in New Jersey for over 27 years and had a few state championships in New Jersey. But again, I have to give so much credit to Jack Cunard for finding me out of grade school and helping to develop me during my formative years at Power. And again, to be able to give him the gift of a city championship in his last official game at Power continues to mean something very significant to me.
Well, if I could add right here, because I was right behind you at Power, Mr. Cunard, who we called Clark Kent because he wore those thick
the big glasses.
I have. We literally called him by, but the great guy, wonderful teacher, and I actually got to meet his wife a few times over the years. And you probably know this, but he left Power only because he was from Freehold, New Jersey. The commute, if you know where Freehold is, and I do,
Right.
exit 8, Freehold to Power, boy, that's a brutal commute.
Right.
But Freehold high school job opened up right after his 70 season, so he had to be the greatest applicant in the history of the world for Freehold basketball coach. And Mrs. Cunard said he loved Power, of course, but just the practical matter of living in Freehold and going to Power. But
absolutely,
he was a wonderful guy. She's a wonderful woman. I think she's still around. I know a few years ago she came up to one of the reunions at Power. So
yes.
He was a big factor for many of us. I find it so fascinating the way that you got to Power, the whole Cardinal Hayes thing. And I was at both of those championship games, and I agree with you. Just one side note that people will find interesting. The year after you left, Coach Malone sent us all, he didn't have his own basketball camp like he would in later years. He sent us, of course, to Jack Curran's camp, the Malloy coach's camp. And they put all the power guys in one like bungalow or whatever it was. And who were our counselors? Kevin Joyce and Brian Winters. And they did not like us. We did not like them, especially since you had frankly just, kicked their butts that year.
Yeah.
But whatever, that's a personal aside. But back then there was a real, I'll say from my perspective as a top baseball player, there was like a real hatred between Power and Malloy. I'm saying that for me. I don't know if you feel that way, but tell me about whatever else about Power, and then how you were recruited and you went to Maryland and your Maryland college career.
Well, again, my years at Power were very special and continued to be very special. So many years after, the great individuals that have attended Power through the many, many, many years. I had a friend that I worked with in the 90s in Baltimore. And he told me that his father had played at Power and was a member of the 1939 championship team. So that relationship became very positive from a business standpoint when I was working at that particular point in my professional career. And it had to do with, again, with Power Memorial. But through Power and the success that we had as a basketball team and some of the personal successes that I had as a player, I had the opportunity of receiving close to 100 basketball scholarships or letters of offer or letters of introduction. And one of the first schools that I visited was the University of Maryland. And I was very much influenced by Lefty Driesell, as well as George Raveling, who was the assistant coach at Maryland. And though meeting those two individuals, I just couldn't see me going anywhere else and playing with anyone else. I did visit schools like South Carolina, Duke, Boston College, and University of Connecticut. But I wanted to play with Lefty and George Raveling, and that was where I set my mind and my purpose. And as it turned out, and it was completely done independently, Lenny Elmore had also visited Maryland, and that was the school of his, well, that was one of the top schools of his choice. And so we both made decisions to go to Maryland completely independent of each other, but the thought to continue our friendship and continue playing with each other was a very positive move. And so we both decided to accept a scholarship at Maryland, and everything worked well. Our freshman year.
Oh, Jap, and for 1 second, if I could just interject, because you're being a little modest here, because I just want to tell everybody, the younger guys may not know, I know, but you and your senior year, you and Lenny Elmore and your 6th through 8th grade teammate Ed Searcy were not only named first team All-City players by both the Daily News and the New York Post, but you were also named All-Americans. And this was the first time, and I don't know if there's been a second since, at least in New York, this was the first time that 3 of you were named first team All-City coming from the same team. So yeah. I know you skipped over that, but again, I'd rather have at least the younger people, or maybe the much older people, just have an understanding of how good you guys were, because I saw a ton of those games. And it was just incredible. It was, to me, like watching a college team playing in high school. Those were my feelings at the time, all those years ago. I just want to bring that out.
Well, again, I tend to skip over that, but you're absolutely right. My senior year at Power, Ed Searcy, Lenny Elmore, and myself, we were all selected to various high school All-American teams. And we were on the first team All-City for the Daily News and New York Post. And it was absolutely the first time in New York City history that three players from the same team ever made the first team, All-City teams. And definitely the first time one team had placed three individuals onto various high school All-American teams. So, and we were judged to be the #1 team in the country that year. And a very proud record that we shared together with Lenny, Ed, and myself. And again, we were just glad that we were able to give this to Power, because Power had given us so much also.
Okay, well, let's move on to the Maryland years now. I just wanted you to get that in because, again, on the big picture of life, that strikes me as very important, and people should know that.
Well, one of the proud accomplishments of our team, and again, that's something that continues to sit well with me in thoughts and memories, and glad that we had that opportunity to do that, to give back to Power and to help to add a sense of amazing, incredible accomplishment to the school that had received so much tribute, particularly during the days of Lou Alcindor. And so we were able to help bring back a city championship that had not been attained since 1965, which was Lou Alcindor's senior year at Power.
Yep.
So, moving forward and, going to the University of Maryland, freshmen had to play on the freshman team. So that year, Lenny and I played on the Maryland freshman team, and we had players, one of the top players in the country, Tom McMillan, who we had played against in high school, and we beat their team, Mansfield, by 25, 30 points. But he was deemed to be the #1 high school player in the country at 6'11", averaging close to almost 45, 50 points a game. But once we played their school, we understood why he was averaging 40 to 55 points a game, because he was the only one taking shots. So, but our freshman team at Maryland, we were ranked as the #1 freshman team in the country. So, that was pretty interesting, coming from my high school senior year, being on a team that was regarded as the best high school team in the country, and then going to Maryland and playing on a freshman team, which was deemed to be the #1 freshman team in the country. And plus, going from a 22-0 record in high school to a 16-0 record freshman year. So I was on a streak of about 38 games without a loss.
Wow.
Our sophomore year, I think we won the first 4 games of our season. And then we had a very unexpected and untimely loss against the University of Virginia, that whipped our butts by 20 points. And so that kind of put things back into a reality for Lefty as well as the team. And we had a decent sophomore year at Maryland. Our team playing in the ACC back then, only one team could represent the ACC in the NCAA finals, or the NCAA tournament, I should say. And in order to progress to the tournament, NCAA tournament, you had to win the ACC tournament. We lost the ACC tournament our sophomore year to North Carolina. And subsequently, we were selected to play in the NIT. And fortunately, we were able to win the NIT in 1972. And North Carolina, that represented the ACC, went on to the Final Four that year before subsequently losing. So we had a successful sophomore year as a team. Personally, for myself, I had a very so-so sophomore year, but there were a lot of things that were going on in my life, my early life at Power. By the time I entered my sophomore year at Power, I was married, and
Wow.
I had a baby daughter. So my sophomore year, there were a lot of pressures that were placed on me that I didn't recognize the pressures that were there, but subsequently there were a lot of pressures that were placed on me. Many sleepless nights with a young child in the house, and here I am. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a full-time student, and I'm a basketball player. And I'm like 19, 20 years old, and
So this
trying to.
was, Jap, this was your sophomore year at Maryland, right?
This is my sophomore year in Maryland.
I thought you had said Power before. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, my sophomore year in Maryland. So personally, for me, there was so many different things going on. Again, we had a fine team. Lenny had a fine sophomore year, but it was somewhat disappointing from my perspective for my own personal reasons. And I also started having some slight knee issues. And so some of my time was curtailed because of some nagging knee situations. So after our sophomore year, my junior year, we came back, and before the season started, I kind of landed on my knee a little awkwardly, and it started to bother me again. So I went to a doctor, and they suggested that I have surgery. So consequently, I ended up missing my junior year, the entire year, because I had knee surgery, and was able to overcome that. We had a fine, my team had a fine junior year. We again lost the ACC championship to North Carolina State, which at that time featured probably the best college player that I've ever seen in David Thompson.
Thompson.
And so unfortunately, we were able to play in the tournament because North Carolina State was on probation that year. So they couldn't proceed to the tournament. So Maryland had its chance to play in the NCAA tournament and played through to the Sweet 16 and lost against Providence that featured Ernie
DiGregorio?
Ernie DiGregorio and Marvin Barnes.
Yes. Wow.
So our team lost to that team. And then coming back for our senior year, I had fully recuperated from my knee surgery and was really working hard, looking forward to what could have been a redshirt junior year. But I decided very early on, because I had a family to consider, that year was going to be my last year regardless. And so I got myself prepared for that. And working so hard, I injured my back. And so starting the season, I had some nagging back injuries that I'm sure were all related to the recuperation process of my knee surgery. So it got me off to a slightly slower start my senior year. We had a good year. We were continuously in the top 5 in the country throughout the entire season. Subsequently, we lost to North Carolina State 3 times that year, twice in the conference games, and we lost to North Carolina State in the ACC championship game. and losing to North Carolina State, we could not go to the tournament. So the team was invited to go back to play in the NIT, and immediately following our North Carolina State loss, we voted in the locker room as a team whether we wanted to accept the invitation to the NIT, and to a person, we said no. We had gone there, we had done that. Our eye was on the national title that year, and if we were not going to be able to participate in the NCAAs, then our season was over, and subsequently my college career ended at that moment because I did not come back for that additional year that I had.
And Jap, if I could interject here, just so again, the younger people won't know, when you were a freshman at Maryland, and also when Kareem, then Lou Alcindor, was a freshman at UCLA, you guys were not allowed to play on the varsity because those were the rules back then. As you know, later in life, in the last 20 years or 25 or whatever it's been, not only did freshmen play on the varsity, you could go from high school to the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a back and forth that you probably know a lot about, the one and done rule now, but you simply weren't. The other thing I wanted to ask you, which I'm pretty sure this is true, because of those NC State Maryland games, and I think at one point you guys were number 1 and 2 in the country in one of those years. I think that was the impetus. Again, young people today won't even know this. You said it 2 or 3 times. If you didn't win your conference, you couldn't be in, which always struck me as a stupid rule back then, because if you're number 1 and 2 in the country and you happen to play in any championship game, yours, of course, was the well-known famous ACC Incredible back then. The loser didn't go. And that's so stupid, because not only does it not happen today, you can have the 5th or 6th or 7th team, you know, the ACC got 7 teams in this year. But
Right.
again, back when you played, if you were the 2nd team, and even if you were number 2 in the country, you were out of luck. So again, I don't think a lot of people realize that, although you mentioned that a few years. But also tell me if you know, I thought that was the impetus, you guys being number 2 in the country and losing to NC State. And, you know, they had, my recollection is they had Burleson,
Mm-hmm. And David Thompson.
Well, greatest sleeper ever. But go ahead, just tell. But I just want
to be exact, our senior year, the top 3-4 teams in the country that year were UCLA, North Carolina State, Maryland. So we never made it to number 1, but there were some weeks that we were number 2 in the country. But losing to North Carolina State those 2 times during the season, and then in the ACC championship game, we ended the season rated as the number 4 team in the country, although we did not go and play in the tournament.
Right.
And subsequent to that, the next year, the NCAA installed a new rule, and it was considered to be called the Maryland rule, because Maryland was considered to be the best college team that was not invited to play in the NCAA tournament. Also, back at that point in time, there were only 32 to 36 teams playing in the tournament. So again, it limited how many teams from a conference could play. But because of the Maryland rule in 1975, they allowed 2 teams from the ACC to move into the NCAA tournament. So we did have a little effect on the actual NCAA rules in terms of selecting teams to play in the tournament, even though we were not the beneficiary of that scenario.
Well, that was a big effect, not a little effect. That changed the world. And, you know, now, you know, 64 up to 68, and, you know, they have teams with 500 records. I mean, I have to think sometimes you just shake your head, because I remember those days. And even back then, though, even before the Maryland rule, everyone was saying, how can this team's number 2 in the country, number 4 in the country? How can they not be in the tournament? It was so stupid. But it made it a lot easier, frankly, for the teams that did make it. And I'm not knocking UCLA for winning all those titles, although, you know, they had Lou Alcindor, they had Bill Walton, but the competition, because so much of it was great in your conference, never even got a chance. And just
Hmm.
because I think one year you lost in triple overtime is my
Right.
recollection.
Our senior year, we lost to North Carolina State in overtime.
So the notion that you couldn't cause some damage in the tournament, of course you could have. You could have won it, but never even got the opportunity. So that was a big effect. So I just want to say, so you got a criminal justice degree from Maryland, which is incredible given all the stuff that you told us about with knee injuries, and you had a baby. That in and of itself, because as you know, a lot of these guys do not get their degree. Nowadays they're one and done. I mean, it's not even a thought. Some go back and get their degree, but I think that's an incredible accomplishment. So we want to talk, and this is a broad-based question, but I know you became a New York City Special Narcotics Court investigator with your criminal justice degree. And as much as I know about you, I never heard that, but just take us from using your criminal justice degree, obviously, for something good, and then going on to your years at Field and all. I don't want to even, I want you to talk about it, but give us, for lack of a better term, a history of where you went after Maryland, all through to the present day, if you'd like.
Okay. Well, again, I majored in criminal justice. I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to apply that. I was a big fan of the FBI, Secret Service, and
Wow.
I thought perhaps that I could, pad myself on a path to have a good career along those lines. But what had happened, I was invited to come to New York. I was still in Maryland, but I was invited to come to New York to have a discussion with a European basketball team out of Barcelona. And so I thought about it because I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue in the basketball realm because I just had other responsibilities that I thought were more important. So
Right.
I went to New York to meet with this European team. And when I got to New York, I went to my mother's apartment and there was a telegram. For those who remember telegrams, there was a telegram waiting for me, basically stating that the team had folded. And with hearing that information, the gentleman that was assisting me in this process, he had a good friend who was an assistant district attorney in New York working for the Special Narcotics Court.
Wow.
And so I'm in New York now. And so this individual suggested that I speak with his good friend with the Special Narcotics Court. And as it turned out, they just happened to be looking for a junior type investigator. And so I went in to meet with the officials of the Special Narcotics Court, and I was hired.
Wow.
So interestingly, my very first day of work there, they send me to the courts to sit in this one court case, and the court case happened to be against the ex-girlfriend of Abby Hoffman. And they wanted me to go sit in this trial and gather information from what was being said, because they then wanted me to go out and try to locate Abby Hoffman.
Wow.
So, and so I thought it was so interesting because I knew who Abby Hoffman was from the Chicago 7, knew the background, the history. Right. And so just to be part of that scenario and to think that they actually expected me to go out and find Abby Hoffman. I'm knocking on Abby Hoffman's neighbors' doors, and the people are opening the doors and closing doors in my face, not even answering any questions. So right. It was quite an experience. I remained with the Special Narcotics Court for about 6 to 7 months. But unfortunately, my daughter was still in Maryland. And at that point in time, I was having some issues with the ex-wife at this point. And it was very important for me to have a significant relationship with my daughter. So I decided that I was going to move back to Maryland. And some of the alumnus at Maryland, there were a few alumni that worked with the National Security Agency. And so I had come down for a basketball game, Maryland basketball game, and talked to some of the alumni, and they were asking if I'd be interested in being considered for work with the National Security Agency.
Wow.
To be perfectly honest, I didn't know much about NSA at that point in time, so I kind of did my research and understood that they were an agency somewhat similar in scope to the CIA. So I did apply for a position with the National Security Agency, and while I was still working with the Special Narcotics Court in New York. And within about a month and a half, I was offered a job at the National Security Agency. An investigator came to New York and was doing a background investigation on me and spoke with my supervisors at the Special Narcotics Court. It didn't really register to me the significance of what I was looking to get myself into. And I was, interviewed, researched, polygraphed, and medical emotional type tests, every virtual test in the book to be considered for employment with the National Security Agency. And I was given a top secret clearance. When I started working at NSA, my first day, my coworkers were asking, how in the hell did you get a top secret clearance in like 30 days? Typically it took 9 months to a year in order to get a top secret clearance. But again, sports and the individuals that I knew from the University of Maryland had a significant impact on that process, and they put me on the fast track for a top secret clearance, and I was a special agent. I became a special agent. I went to 16 weeks of federal agent training school in Washington, D.C., and he was able to have that label as a special agent. And I was a special agent with the National Security Agency, involved with a number of interesting opportunities that I don't think I could still talk about. But it was a very interesting period of time working at NSA. It got me back to Maryland. And what that did was help to put me on a track to obtain custody of my daughter and become a single parent to my daughter, which I was for a number of years, which to me was probably my greatest accomplishment and my greatest achievement, just in terms of the responsibility of a father and having that ultimate responsibility to be a single dad to a 4 or 5 year old girl was pretty daunting, but it continues to remain one of the best things that happened to me.
Well, I know you went on, and you could talk about this again as much as you want. TV advertising, marketing executive for 20 years. The one I know about, and frankly, most people know about, is your years at Fila and how you can explain it better than I, kind of brought them into the basketball world, for lack of a better term. But just go ahead, through that, what you're doing today, whatever you want. We just want to hear all about it.
Okay. Well, again, after having about almost a 6-year career at the National Security Agency, I was offered a job with Amtrak, and I became the regional director human resources with Amtrak.
Wow.
And I took that job primarily because it afforded me the opportunity to stay at home and not have as much travel as I was finding myself having when I was with the National Security Agency. And again, trying to be a single parent at that point was kind of difficult if you had to travel much. So I moved over to Amtrak. I worked there for 5 years as director of HR. From there, I moved into the TV marketing and advertising industry and thrived in that industry for about 6 or 7 years before I had the opportunity to get back involved with basketball. And it came purely by a twist of luck. I became the radio announcer of basketball games for Coppin State in Baltimore. Because of my marketing, I was able to originate a contract with one of the Baltimore radio stations to get Coppin basketball games on air. And as such, I became the official broadcaster of Coppin State. Now, Coppin State was being supported athletic wear-wise by Fila. And so I began brief acquaintanceship with the individuals at Fila. And one day out of the blue, I received a phone call from Fila, from the vice president of marketing at Fila, asking me if I would consider becoming the director of basketball at Fila. Fila was just really getting involved in the basketball game with basketball shoes and apparel. And they had signed one player the year before, Jamal Mashburn. And interestingly enough,
From Cardinal Hayes to Mal Mashburn.
From Cardinal Hayes, exactly. Exactly. What goes around comes around. And what Fila had done, and they did this really not truly understanding how they were changing the entire footwear game with Nike and Reebok and Adidas, but they gave Jamal a $1 million contract. And Jamal was the very first NBA player to receive a $1 million contract. Michael Jordan's contract was somewhere in the vicinity of maybe $500,000 to $600,000 a year guaranteed. But Michael made his money on sales of the shoe. But as far as a basic contract, Jamal Mashburn was the first person that received an actual $1 million shoe contract.
Wow.
And Fila really didn't know what to do with him, how to properly market him. So they brought me in the next year. And one of the first things that I was involved with was assisting in the recruitment and signing of Grant Hill to a Fila contract. And because Jamal had received the $1 million contract the year before, Grant Hill was going to receive a $1 million plus contract this year. And because of that, other companies trying to sign Grant Hill had to offer him $1 million contracts. And so Fila got the entire ball rolling with these multi-million dollar contracts, quite honestly, by mistake. But it turned out well for the NBA athletes from a footwear contract standpoint from that point on. And now you have players that are signing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of footwear contracts. And so I was able to get back involved with basketball from that standpoint. And I was also able to start creating community initiatives using corporate dollars to fund positive community campaigns. And I used my opportunity at FILA to create a program that I labeled Operation Rebound, where I would take some of our NBA players, and entertainers were really wearing and into FILA at that time. So I was able to put together a group of entertainers, Yolanda Adams, who was a Grammy-winning gospel contemporary singer, Kid from Kid and Play, Jazzy Jeff, Boys to Men. So for
Wow.
4 years, I was taking groups of individuals into middle schools across the country. And quite honestly, that concept really was pushed on to me in a degree by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Wow.
Because when I worked with FILA and my first trip to LA, I wanted to see if I could connect with Kareem, who had retired at that particular point in time. I wanted to see if I could perhaps connect with him to get involved with him, because he was doing things in the community with young kids. And unfortunately, he was still under Adidas contract, so he couldn't get involved with me, but he helped in his way to help shape formulate a plan to do my own thing, based a lot of what he was doing with kids. If Kareem was working with kids, I wanted to work with kids also.
Sure.
As the ultimate power memorial person, I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I mean, to me, Kareem is probably one of the most intelligent, articulate, and inspiring individual that I've had the opportunity of meeting. And it's just a great coincidence that he's a Power Memorial graduate, and he did so much for the Power Memorial. And I would like to think that I had a little something to assist and add at Power also.
Yes,
So
you did.
we have that connection, and I hope to continue to have positive connections with Kareem, and just do the positive things that he's doing through society right now.
And tell us what you're doing. You have Terp Marketing now, which you're still running, I guess. You're the boss of Terp Marketing, I'm guessing. Tell us.
Yeah, I was with FILA for about 5 years, and then went back to the TV marketing arena.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And going back into the TV marketing arena, I took that Operation Rebound program, recreated some things, and I created a program called 4 Hour Teens. And in Baltimore, for about a 4-year period of time, I ran that program in Baltimore. It was even nominated for a Community Emmy Award.
Wow.
And it really basically helped to put out some of the issues that were affecting teens, and the fact that communication between teens and parents are not always the best. And what I wanted to do was to create a program that helped to try to bridge the gap in communications between teens and their parents,
Great.
or to allow parents to have a better understanding of what was really going out there in the world of teens.
Yep.
So that would hopefully create better conversational pieces between parents and teens. So that program for our teens was something that I created in Baltimore while I was working for an NBC station in Baltimore. I subsequently moved to Las Vegas about 9 years ago, and was able to recreate the 4 Hour Teens program here in Las Vegas, and was able to run that program here in Las Vegas for an ABC station for 2 years. And it was the station's main community initiative program. So a lot of the rationale behind my being involved with teen related issues was primarily because I was a single dad, and I recognized very early, issues between parents and their kids. And I tried to do things a little different, raising a preteen daughter, but it was difficult, and I had to learn. So I needed help, and I just really thought that creating these types of programs would be beneficial to society in helping to bridge the gap between the issues of the teen related issues that were so numerous, and providing some type of an assistance to parents to try to, again, help to bridge that gap of communication. And working in those particular areas for the many years that I devoted myself to working with teens has been the most positive experience for me, and has made me a far better person, uh, and very proud to have been part of those types of programs.
Wow, that's incredible stuff. I got a note from our videographer, Power grad Dennis Mooney, who tells me I would be remiss if I didn't mention your mother, who is 102 years old.
Absolutely, and thank you. I'm very fortunate to still have my mother with me.
Yeah.
She is 1 month away from 102. She's currently in a nursing home up in the Bronx. So
Wow.
we speak by FaceTime, a couple of times a week. Uh, she's hanging in. She has a bit of dementia, but she's very sharp and very knowledgeable. And again, I'm very fortunate to still have her in my life. And I hope that I can have her part of me for as long as possible. And in fact, my last years in TV in Las Vegas, I moved away from the teen issues and started creating community initiatives specific to seniors, because there were so many issues for individuals that were caregiving to their parents who had no technical understanding and knowledge of the system for seniors. And I was in that same field of not understanding and not knowing how to better guide my mother through her senior years issues. And so the last 3 years of my working in TV, I specifically targeted uh, initiatives and created programs that were very specific to help educate caregivers and potential caregivers on so much information that was out there that could be utilized to help them make better decisions for the overall care of their loved ones. And working still to this day with in marketing scenarios with AARP here in Las Vegas, Nevada, senior care facilities, Medicare, Medicaid organizations to help put out information specific to those coming into 65 plus type scenarios. And so again, I like to think that that is a continued carryover of what a good Power Memorial person does. A good Power Memorial person, in my opinion, helps to create positive situations for society. The brothers at Power, the teachers at Power, Mr. Cunit from Power, they install some very positive and solid guidelines for the betterment of us as individuals. And although it doesn't always take with certain people, I'm fortunate to say that it has taken with me, And everything that I do, I try to do for not only my own betterment, but for the betterment of society.
Well, that's a fascinating summary on this whole interview. I will say it's interesting, but not surprising to learn that as great as your high school and college accomplishments were, it's far greater to raise a daughter as a single dad and all the work you've done with teens and now all the work you're doing with seniors. And I'll just conclude from my end by telling you this. So we have a pretty active Power Memorial Alumni Association, which I know you know about, but I'm going to guess now at least 1,000 people, mostly Power alum, but about 1,000 people or more will wind up watching this. So any final words? You just gave a great summary, but any final words that you would say to those guys? Because I feel exactly as you do about Power and everything you just said, and had similar mentors, Brother Jensen, people at Brendan Malone. But any final conclusion? You just gave a great conclusion, but anything else? Because we're going to wrap this up now.
Well, again, I feel very fortunate. I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to be hand selected by Jack Cunard to become a Power Memorial person. I feel so positive to have had the opportunity to meet and know people such as Jack Cunard, Brendan Malone, Brother Jensen, Mr. Coppolino, my old chemistry teacher who was so deeply involved in alumni-related causes for many years before his death. The people and the friends that I met through Power that are continuing to be very visible in my life to this very day. The thankfulness to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for what he helped to bring to Power and how he helped to place Power Memorial on this prestigious map. And what we were able to come and help to add to that. And the many players who came after us and the success that they had, it was such a positive experience. And my life would have been so far different had I not accepted the opportunity to come to Power. I just hope that the organization, the alumni organization, can continue to strengthen itself and keep those that are part of it in a situation where we can do more in whatever ways to continue to foster what Power Memorial meant to us and all the positive things that those alumni have done for themselves and their families and for society.
That's fabulous, Jap. So this has been the Power Memorial Hall of Fame interview with double Hall of Fame inductee Jap Trimble, both as a player on the 1970 team and individually. I hope you got a good view of his entire life. I hope you guys watch this and will comment when it's put on YouTube. This has been Steve Callis, and we will do this again with other people over the next few weeks, months, and years, hopefully. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you the next time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.